This is part two of chapter one. Conservatives gave three excuses for why there was violence in the United States, which the trend started late 60s and 70s. They believed that the criminal justice system was too soft on crime. They also thought that crime was just a result of modern life. But when we look at the research based on other industrialized countries, the United States was leading the race on violent crime rates. Finally, because of baby boomers, the 60s and 70s saw more teenagers than had been seen prior to that. And so conservatives primarily blamed it on that there was no meaningful outlet for youthful energy, or that parents were not instructing their youth correctly on ethical and moral issues. That may explain juvenile crime, but it really doesn't go on to explain adult crime. Today, we have some known sources based on the empirical research. Poverty and inequality do raise the chance of someone being more likely to participate in crime. Prison itself, by going to prison, exposes people to other inmates who are pro criminal. And so it not only has an effect on the offender, but being away from the family has an effect on the spouse or significant other left, who has to take on different roles. The children, the research shows that children of incarcerated people are more likely to become incarcerated as adults. And it affects the community where vast a majority of males ages, 20 to 30 are missing because they're incarcerated. Our society has guns. We have so many guns, we can't take them away. And there's easy access to guns, yeah, legally or illegally. Finally, because we have criminalized drugs, there is an economy that goes along with the drugs. So, what works to reduce crime? First of all, the authors talk about crime prevention through early intervention, child abuse and neglect, reaching parents that are abusing and protecting these children, enhancing child's intellectual and psychological development, and we'll go into that in a minute. Support and guidance for vulnerable adolescents. If we know that the parents are dysfunctional, we need to provide more programming to make sure that the adolescents don't become dysfunctional as well. And those that have gotten into the juvenile system, that we work more intensely with them. So, what works for crime prevention? I've added a few here that are not in the book. The first and most important is focusing on risk factors. And the two biggest risk factors are pro criminal attitudes and pro criminal associates. So, when you send somebody to prison, they're hanging around pro criminal people, and there's only pro criminal associates. So you can see that prison really isn't a good influence for most offenders. Cognitive behavioral therapy works on specifically targeting what we would call thinking errors and teaching new ways to think that are more pro social. For juveniles, we need more family counseling and parental training. For an example, I worked with parents of drug addicted newborns, and it was surprising that the taken for granted knowledge that I had from growing up in a pro social parenting environment was surprising. For example, one of my clients, they never used the bathtub because that's where the keg was kept. And so the children got scabies from having dirty skin because they never took baths. We need to teach social competency skills so people are more pro social and can survive in this society. Therapeutic communities for drug treatment and working with drug offenders rather than incarcerating them. Removing lead and toxins from homes and the water as well as the environment. We've had two incidences in Michigan that really drive this home. We have the Flint water crisis, and then in Rockford, where Wolverine was dumping toxic waste from making shoes that seeped into the water where PFAs are really high. Well, this all affects brain development and intelligence. The crux of this chapter, though, is focused on what the authors refer to as Pyrrhic defeat theory. This is the idea that, and is a military term, that you win, but it costs so much in troops and treasure, could be, lives on the other side, your equipment, whatnot, that it amounts to a defeat. So they took this term and applied it to the criminal justice. And despite the criminal justice belief that we must fight crime, the methods that we use really never reduce it or eliminate it. So let's use two examples that come from the book. Gun violence. People are horrified at the amount of gun violence we have in this country, but as you know today, we cannot have a normal conversation about it because there's a side, particularly sponsored by the NRA, that doesn't want any restrictions. So if you're mentally ill, chances are, because we don't connect the mental health system within the background check, you will be able to get a gun if you have a prior criminal record. Drugs is a huge example. We have spent trillions of dollars on a war on drugs, and we have not reduced drug usage in this country. When the war on drugs started, it was primarily targeted at crack cocaine. Then we moved to meth. And today, now we're fighting a war on opiates and synthetic fentanyl. Why is crime allowed? Well, Durkheim, who is a theorist, an early theorist, said that knowing what crime is, it creates a boundary of what's unacceptable in your society. And it's based on the belief that there's consensus within your society, and it lets them know what is dangerous and who is a threat, which is true on many crimes, throughout the world. Most people are against murder, they're against rape, they're against robbery. But when it's not a consensus, like, for example, lower crimes like prostitution, gambling, and even personal drug usage, it really questions whether or not we have that consensus within our society. The second one is relatively new, and starting in the 70s and early 80s with the idea of promoting a free market, it expanded who could gain from the criminal justice system. So an example would be Baldwin, where they built the Michigan Youth Correctional Facility. And this was built by a private prison company, which was for profit, made a profit on this prison, but it took it to an area which was the lowest tax base and very poor. So even though a lot of people from Baldwin didn't get hired at the prison, the people that did get hired used the services within Baldwin, like getting gas, going to lunch or dinner at the restaurants. And so it expanded the tax base, and even the private prison built the water tower that still exists today in Baldwin. So the prison was seen as an economic benefit. Well, then the services that are provided, like you might need supplies for the prison, or like a laundry service, cleaning services, things of that nature, that really expanded who makes money from the criminal justice system. So once you're outside of purely keeping it within the system, other people don't want to lose the money that they gained. And for example, one of the biggest lobbyists to keep crimes such as drugs and immigration the same were the private prisons, because they could benefit from them. So that concludes kind of my review of chapter 1.